that's looking. Oh, thank you. Yeah, shoot, I should have mentioned that before. Anyway, okay. Thank you very much for remembering to record. So, so what Aristotle then does is he finds examples in language that would support the Parmenidean case, and that's when we got these funny sentences like the unmusical becomes musical, and then he gives us some other linguistic examples, right? Like the unmusical human becomes the musical human, and a human being becomes musical. We get these linguistic sentences, items. But what Aristotle then does is he looks at them and sees, what falls prey to the Parmenidean critique and what doesn't. And on the basis of this, he develops a concept, the concept of becoming or change, in which he says, which seems for us very simple, obvious, right? That not only that if you want to think about change, you have to think about more things than just the contraries, not just the musical and the unmusical. If you stick with those, change will be miraculous and there will be no explanation of it. There will be no accounting. It will just be a miracle. And so he gives us his new concept of change. And that new concept of change is secured against the Parmenidean critique. It shows how change can be thought as actually existing change, as real change, and not as merely appearing to change, right? The Parmenidean critique is if change is going from unmusical to musical, then what you have is one thing going out of existence and another thing coming into existence. So nothing has changed. You just have two radically different beings, the unmusical, the musical. There is no change. Now we might say, well, there's change for the perceiver, right? But that just strengthens Parmenides' point. So, well, the perceiver thinks they are witnessing change, but in fact, there can't be change under these circumstances. So we either subjectivize change by saying, well, the perceiver thinks that there's something changing there, and thereby, if we subjectivize it, we say it's not real. It just belongs to perception, or it's just whatever. Or we look at it ontologically as something disappear or ceasing to exist and something else coming to exist, in which case it's just nothing but miraculous. And what Aristotle's concept of change that includes the contraries plus this interestingly complex concept of the underlying subject. Right? This is the minimal structure necessary to think change in such a way that change doesn't require us to say of it, it's a miracle. Or it doesn't require of us to say it's the mere appearance of change, or it's just a subjective perception of change. But the concept of change. Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. Sandy, I'm gonna hit you before I finish that thought.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get all this in my head. So I'm not lost yet, so that's good. But is this thing that I'm looking at here that you've drawn up, is this an example of the change you're talking about, or is
No.
this is a response to like the people like Russell and the
Exactly.
miracle thing. Okay, exactly. All right. I just wanted to clarify that because I was getting a little confused. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for making that clear. I didn't realize that would be yes, but it's very possibly misleading what I'm doing right now. So thank you, Garth.
Yeah, I was just I wanted to say that pair of contraries. You have like the thesis, the antithesis, and the underlying subject, I guess you could call them. That structure is all over Aristotle. It's one of his main methods of analysis. And the whole, like all three books on substance, zeta, eta, theta, and then the book on oneness that I'm reading right now, iota, these all use that structure throughout the whole argument.
Excellent. So, thank you for pointing that out. Right.
Yeah,
so Sandy, you're getting something that's going to help you with future texts.
Okay. Can you type it in the chat or something so I can write it down, please? Thanks.
Well, he doesn't use thesis and antithesis really. I mean, obviously.
Right.
What were those? Are those Latin or something?
Right. There's the contraries and the underlying subject.
Yeah, they're usually called contraries.
Right.
But in book iota, he argues that they are a pair. There's the thing and not the thing. Mm-hmm. And that this underlies thinking even when you have weird situations like the one and the many, and you say, well, there's one and it's opposed by many things. So can it really have this structure still? And he argues that yes, it does. Mm-hmm. So it seems like this is one of Aristotle's fundamental ideas. But I sort of wanted to ask Sandy whether, is your problem that you don't understand Aristotle, or you just find that he seems to be saying just a whole bunch of mundane things that you think are trivially true, and that therefore there is nothing to understand, maybe? Is that your problem?
No, my problem is just that I'm not good at details and the kind of work that he's making me do. I just struggle with that. Like I'm a big picture, like to kind of see where I'm going, and I don't 100% see that yet. So that's why it's just an issue with the way, with I guess my learning disorder. But that's all.
No, it's also part of how I'm presenting this. I mean, maybe the best way to think about what we're doing is Aristotle is showing us how to arrive at certain philosophical concepts that are themselves the solution to the problem of being and non-being. But we're not really connecting them yet, right? We're not saying, okay, so what is the material universe, and what is the form? What is the soul? What is being, right? We're not even close to answering those kinds of questions, right? Because in order to answer the questions, we have to have the appropriate concepts, and we even have to understand, what is actually being asked in these questions. What is being? I mean, what kind of question is that? The is of the verb is already implies the being that we're asking of. So are we asking, what is the verb is, or what are we asking? So So right now, I would like you to think of ourselves as archaeologists, and we're at a dig and we're finding these marvelous little shards, and we're understanding each of these shards for what it is. And as we understand the shards, right, and we explicate that understanding, we will notice that the understanding of the various shards start to overlap and start to interlock and start to mutually illuminate each other. All right. If that's helpful, right? Maybe if you think I'm supposed to be getting what being is, then yeah, obviously you're going to be lost. But if you think of yourself as this archaeologist looking at these little pieces of a past culture and just explicating, what they are, and then in the group we think a little bit about why you would say the kind of things that Aristotle says, the pieces themselves will start talking about each other, to put it somewhat esoterically.
I'll just interject quickly that what you said about the miracle thing, that was helpful to me, because at least it clarifies to me that one person can only go to a certain point just by saying, oh, it's a miracle.
Right. And
Aristotle is like, no, actually, I can unpack that and show you why there's actually more going on there. And that makes sense to me. I understand that. I actually find that really fun and exciting. because then, we actually can think and understand something. Whereas before it was just like, oh, well, or I don't know, let's just gape in amazement, like, which is not very rewarding.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Also feels like it puts you in a position where you can be easily taken advantage of. I don't know.
You.
That's just my, and that's just how life has treated me. I don't know about other people.
No, thank you, Sandy. I think that's perfect. We often have people say, well, that's just how things are. Right? Things just pop in and pop out of existence. That's a brute fact. There's no explaining it. And what these people don't recognize is that if that's how things are, then there's no such thing as explaining anything. So what we've done is we've accidentally completely hollowed out the very notion of explaining anything if we accept this kind of brute fact. And I think that's the additional step that Aristotle's helped making clear to us, that we can then become clear to ourselves that, yeah, part of if we're going to explain, then an explanation has to be an explanation and not a mere semblance of an explanation, not just a hollow shell that doesn't really explain anything. Yeah, so that was awesome. Thank you. Garth and Richard.
Oh, I want to say, like, when I first read through Aristotle, I thought a lot of it was easy. And there were some parts that just seemed anachronistic. But coming back to it and looking at it a second time with this group, and now that I've become a little bit more philosophically literate, I appreciate it more. But like, I've been trying to read Hegel and really struggling with it. And, I think the only way I've made any progress with Hegel is by reading it along with a lot of secondary sources, because secondary sources give their interpretations and they give you sort of something to chew on. Like, maybe you didn't think of this particular chapter or passage in this way, and then you say, oh, well, maybe he was saying that. But usually these secondary sources have their own biases as well, and then you come back and Michael says, oh, that's bullshit or whatever, and you get a chance to, like, refine your point of view. So I don't know if that helps, but
no, I think that was great.
That's the only way I've understood anything in Hegel, because if I try to just read Hegel straight, I just either fall asleep or I get confused. And yeah,
that's why group work's so important. Sandy, you want to follow up directly on Garth before I go to Richard, or do you have a separate point that can wait till after?
No, I just wanted to say I want to understand the little diagram you put up on the screen.
All right.
Before we move on. So
okay, yeah, we won't move on yet. I'm getting there, I promise. Richard, go ahead. Thanks, Sarah and Sandy.
Yeah, so when you're saying, like, talking about the miracle and how, like, change is impossible and things, or I can't quite very well summarize what you're saying, but it's almost kind of like this nihilism and death of kind of like understanding.
Yes.
So this might turn into a huge tangent and rat hole, so, like, don't have to go down it, but I guess, like, as can much be said kind of like in our society today in terms of, like, education and de-emphasizing the classics and and critical thinking, and maybe kind of like Aristotle inspired approach towards just more kind of like rote fact, and then there was much at one point United States was kind of like the envy of the world in terms of education system, kind of like circa kind of early mid 20th century, and
right.
Then and then separately then there was also the shift towards kind of like the moon, towards science, but then and then now there's been a long slide,
right?
Yeah, and we can't even have any kind of a conversation
right
anymore, it seems. But
no, that's a huge topic, and that's a relevant topic, so I'm just going to bite my tongue just for the sake of Aristotle. But I think you're exactly right. I think you're on the right track in thinking about that. I mean, nuanced thinking is not necessarily mathematical thinking. And mathematical thinking has replaced nuanced thinking, that pays attention to the senses of concepts and what they entail and all the rest of it. So I'd be happy if everybody had to read a lot of Aristotle in the schools. I think, I think we'd have a better ordered society. But okay, that's personal. Okay, yeah, thank you, Richard. All right, so getting to this, what am I doing here, right? I'm trying to show that there's something quite magnificent and something we can really learn about philosophical concepts in the way that Aristotle is going about this. So I kind of rehearsed some of the argument of chapter 1:7, just to bring it back in memory, and that's why I'm kind of going on about this, in order to put my finger on how Aristotle is writing, and so it's all language. Right? He's writing his text, so it's all language. But what he's doing is not all grammar. It's not generalizing grammar, right? He's looking at, he's developed his concept, and he's developed his concept not by generalizing grammatical structures. He's developed his concept by thinking, what concept of change is the minimum required to not fall into the trap that Parmenides set, that change is not real. It's only appearance. And it could be objective appearance, could be subjective appearance, but it's still not real. And so Aristotle has now developed a concept, not by generalizing grammar, but by confronting the problem of the non-being of change or becoming. Okay, so what speaks for the non-being of change? Well, thinking of it in terms of contraries. Okay, so maybe there's a way to think of it not just in terms of contraries, not just in terms of unmusical and musical. Okay, or unformed bronze and formed bronze. That's the statue. Not just contraries. So once he's developed the concept, he goes back to language. And now he's equipped with a concept that is not just linguistic, but is actually the solution to a problem, the problem of the non-being of change, or the merely apparent status of change. And then he seeks out in language to see if there's a linguistic form that corresponds to that concept. And I use corresponding here intentionally. Most people think that correspondence theories are getting your thoughts to correspond to your perceptions. But there, the correspondence theory is quite different. It's, is there in language some order of words that allows the concept to be expressed linguistically? All right. And that's why Aristotle goes from talking about something becomes something, which proves to have its problems and is prey to the Parmenidean critique, to something comes from something, in that linguistic form, he's able to show that we can think the concept in this linguistic form. And since we're thinking the concept in this linguistic form, we're not just thinking the words, we're not just thinking the language, we're not just thinking the grammar, but we are thinking what something would have to be in order to count as an instance of change. So what we're thinking here in the concept is the reality of change. And then the question is, does anything measure up to the reality that is thought in the concept? All right. So my little diagram here, it just schematizes this procession. Right? We start with language as the raw, and in my parentheses I put here in brackets the raw material of the concept. Right? And then we arrive at the concept, and in my brackets I say what something would have to be to count as a real instance of a concept. And so in the concept, we have the reality of the thing. We have the reality of the thing. And then we turn back to language to find those linguistic forms that can express the concept, and not just, the conventional ways of talking about change that most of which end up in being susceptible to Parmenidean critique. So now we have language. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, I'm just confused about the first part of this. The raw materials of concepts, language. Is that like just the words?
Oh, right. What I'm trying to do there is that's just a summary of what Aristotle does at the very beginning of Book 1, Chapter 7. He says, when we say becoming, right, we say like the human becomes musical, or the unmusical becomes musical, or the unmusical human being becomes the musical human being. So he gives us some sentences, and that's the kind of raw material I'm talking about, right? So being is said in these ways, right? But change is said, or becoming is said in these ways. But not all of these ways will allow you to escape the Parmenidean critique. In other words, the non-being of change, that change is just an appearance. And so we grapple with that. We grapple with, how must we think change such that it designates something real and not just something apparent? Now we're at the concept. We have this minimal structure. We have to think contraries plus underlying subject. Right? And once we do that, now we have our minimal, our minimal structure, our minimally complex concept. Go ahead.
Is that the reason we do this is because otherwise I would just go around using a word and I wouldn't know exactly what I was talking about?
Right, you were talking about things becoming in a way that implies that becoming is impossible.
Okay, so it's worse actually. I'm in that sense, I'm actually talking out of both sides of my mouth then.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And that's what, homonymy and equivocation, all these things actually cause us to do is these conceptual confusions. And when we're in philosophy, we're not just doing this for practical effects. And in practical everyday life, it doesn't matter how you talk about becoming. But if you want to understand what becoming is, and you need to understand that if you want to understand whether a science or knowledge of it is possible, and therefore whether physics is possible, right? Then you need a non-equivocal concept and a concept that does not lead to the conclusion that becoming is impossible, that becoming is mere appearance. So the theoretical, when we do philosophy, we're doing theoretical work, and we're doing theoretical work, the demands are just much greater than, regular everyday social conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Okay, so, and then we find, then we, that at the top of the ladder, the bottom here is actually the summit, and that's, now we have language that in which our concept can be expressed, and thinking it is thinking the reality of change, and not thinking of change as something that implies that change is impossible, without falling into the Parmenidean trap. So now we have, we started with sentences and we end with sentences, but something dramatic happens in the meantime, right? And that is that's the attaining of the concept, and then the expression of the concept in language. So, I mean, when you kind of understand this, and look at Aristotle's text to see how he does it, right? You'll begin to see how how absurd really this idea that philosophical theories are just generalizations of linguistic habits of social communities. I mean, bad philosophy might be, but I want to give you a really nice example of what a breakthrough this is. Actually, it seems very simple. Yeah, okay. We got contraries, we got the underlying subject, and you got to have both. Okay, duh. Right, but what's the point of bringing them together? It's to solve the problem that I've repeated now a million times, right? How I can have a concept of change that's actually a concept of change, and not a concept of the impossibility of change, or the concept that implies that change is impossible, or that implies that change is just an appearance. All right, so that's the explication of that little diagram. And now I'm kind of just going to go meta, and because I've said so much about the other thing, I can keep this fairly brief, right? We've we've talked about language, we've talked about logic, and we talked about reality. And I just in this second diagram that I'm sharing right now, I just wanted you to kind of appreciate this point, right? That logic, language, and reality, they overlap. And what philosophy is interested in is that area where they overlap. So I got a little arrow pointing to that overlapping area.
I don't see another diagram, but.
Oh, crap. I just, okay, let me see. Maybe I have to stop this share and start another share. Do you see that now? Do you see like Venn diagram?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Right. So I just did this little Venn diagram because part of what we're doing is we're exercising ourselves in just like thinking, you know, what is this identity of thought and being that I've been talking about for a while, and I haven't mentioned it for a little while, trying to get into Aristotle, but I just, you know, what his concept of change has done is show us how to get into this shaded area where logic and language and reality are one. And that would be the realm of the objective, when we're not just talking about words and we're not just doing logic that has nothing to do with reality, and we're not postulating some reality that our logic and language can never attain to, right? What I just walked you through in terms of developing the concept of change shows, I think, you know, how to get into that little shaded area where there is no distinction between logic and language and reality. But the Venn diagram makes clear above and beyond that it is possible to do logic without any relationship to language and reality. It's possible to, you know, use language without any relationship to reality or logic. And it's also possible to, you know, evoke somehow, maybe through grunts or squeals, reality that has nothing to do with language or logic. So it's possible to separate these three different domains. But what's interesting and important and something that to keep focused on is where they not just overlap, but they are indistinguishable from one another. They are one. And that's that little shaded area I pointed there. And it's only if you think that, you know, logic has nothing to do with language or reality that your logic becomes formal and empty. It's only when you think that language has nothing to do with logic or reality that it becomes purely self-referential, or it becomes purely, well, it doesn't refer to anything. It just is a bunch of sounds. And if you think of reality as having nothing to do with logic and nothing to do with language, right, then you're going to get just this inert thing in itself, and that there's nothing to be said about it, and no way to know it. And so you kind of get in the problem. So why are you postulating this unknowable, unattainable, unexpressible thing? So it's and I'm putting this Venn diagram up here because our culture has these habits of thinking that logic is something different than reality. Language has nothing to do with logic, right? In philosophy, in the best philosophy, it's done with the awareness that there is a overlapping of these three things. And if we keep our language and our logic and our reality, you know, like what is real that follows from that together in the way that Aristotle is doing, then we cannot fall into skepticism. We cannot fall into empty formal logic, and we cannot gesture out to some vague thing in itself that we can never attain. Garth.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this idea of logic and language without reality.
Yeah.
It just seems like that doesn't really make any sense, because the logic I mean, how would the logic like apply itself to the language without reality? It seems like that is sort of a contradiction.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I think that's exactly right. But we're not encouraged to think about it very much, I don't think, because we automatically assume that logic is formal logic and therefore it's empty of all content. And we think of, language as this historical thing, and that people just kind of mean whatever historical meanings have developed as a base on the basis of the history of their community. And that because logic is shorn of content, and because language is just an outgrowth of historical experience, right? There's no way for either one of these things to really have any transparency towards reality. And I think that's why we tend to be skeptics, because we have these preconceptions about logic and language. Okay. Anybody have any questions or remarks about the Venn diagram thing?
Oh, I just to respond to that was Garth, right? I would say, I don't know, it seems to me like a lot of contemporary science and economics is doing logic and language totally detached from reality. But maybe that's especially economics. but because I mean, it sounds like they're saying a bunch of stuff and it makes sense when they put it all together, but then it doesn't correspond. So, Right. But that's just me being bitchy. Sorry.
But, yeah. So, I mean, what's nice is if you separate logic from language, you can turn it into a mathematical technique, in which case it's doing nothing except well, what is it doing? It's expressing all the consequences of a set of rules that create the system. Right, and so you get techniques, and if you isolate language, you get techniques of and you can start doing syntax, and you can do some primitive semantics. So you get different sciences up and running, right? But the condition of these sciences being up and running is that you have to turn something that's not in its essence technical into a technique. Into a formal system that has a mathematical structure. And then, so I just want to say that we can do these things, and we can find out lots of really super interesting things about formal systems in logic and syntactical structures in language. I don't want to say those are not worthwhile endeavors. They're very worthwhile, but they're not the whole story. And I think the Greeks are the best examples of how to stay in this shaded area so that we can actually be doing ontology. We can actually be talking about the real, and not just the real for my community or the real for me personally. And and I wanted to tie this together with the way in which his concept of change, which on one hand seems rather unremarkable, but if you look at it in this context, you can see what a giant intellectual act it represents.
I can't find how to raise my hand electronically, so I'm just raising it
physically. Interrupt anytime, Ed.
Just to support your point about this problem that you can simply think that Aristotle was merely discussing the Greek language. That's what happened when I was first reading the Ethics and I was looking at his discussion of temperance. I thought, well, he's just telling me what the Greeks thought when they said the word temperance. But then when you actually look at his discussion, he's ultimately saying the reason that we talk about it this way is because there's a difference between mere animal pleasure and the pleasure that you have when it's informed by reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's not denying that you can come up with linguistic conventions, but he's saying sometimes linguistic conventions reflect a deeper reality.
Right. Exactly. But fabulous, Ed. Thank you. But you have to know the concept of, for instance, temperance, right? You have to have formulated the concept so that so that you can see in language the way in which language reflects the concept. And since it's in the concept that we have the reality of something, because any empirical thing can only count as an instance of change, or as undergoing change, right? If it meets our criteria that are formulated in the concept. And so it's not real thing, or it's not perceptual things that teach us change, because perceptual things can teach us to think of change in terms of going from one contrary to the other contrary. And then Parmenides exposed that you might think that's change, but that's not change. That's actually the impossibility of change. That's things popping in and out of existence, or you're just subjectivizing it, say, well, it's change for you, Michael, because you're imputing some underlying subject, but that's not part of your perception. I'm just going to go quiet for a minute in case anybody wants to formulate something, and if you're done with this topic for a little while, which I understand, then we can.
Oh, I'll say something. So this is going back again, kind of doing this is like your own version of trying to clear out maybe some of the issues that we might be facing when we approach, kind of like how Aristotle's doing that with his predecessors. This is kind of like a modern one that we have.
Right.
So you put this Venn diagram together to kind of show us this other way, so to speak, that Aristotle is working toward. Is that correct?
I think that's fair. I think what I want to do is I want to give you a set of concepts like logic, language, and reality, and to use them as the lens through which you view what Aristotle is doing, so that you don't fall into the trite commonplace that he's making things up, or he's generalizing Greek grammar, or the other kind of stuff like that.
Greek grammar is pretty complex. I'm surprised any Anglophone has the right to attack that, but.
But even if it's complex, it's still just Greek. And so that makes it relative to the Greeks. So, some people say.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Yeah, but then how can we understand it, even if we're not Greeks and we're not living at that time period? Right. I don't know. That's just what I would say.
No, and I think it's a very valid point, but it has to be unpacked. I mean, like why someone might ask, well, why shouldn't you be able to understand it? I don't want to go down that. I don't want to go down that road, but I think you're exactly right that that's the tack that one needs to take. There must be something universal in it for the Greeks to understand it, and I to understand it, and for it to find its way in translation into Latin and Cyrillic and other languages. Clark.
Yeah. This is the translation problem, right? Where, and I mean that's interesting. I never thought about it in context of philosophy because it always comes up in literature, like novels, right, where there's this kind of reductionist view that if you can't read it in the original language, like forget it, you're not going to have access to it. And of course that I'm not on that. Of course I value the original language, but that I'm like no, like people in Japan can understand Shakespeare, like there's universality in what's being expressed. And if we were to people who want to just, I guess, only see the language element are missing the so I guess what you're saying is like some of these people who are approaching Aristotle this way by emphasizing on the Greek are kind of doing the same thing, which is it's just complete idiocy to me personally. But I mean, I guess there are people out there who do approach philosophy. I mean, it seems even more absurd to me to approach philosophy that way than modern literature that's fiction. But I mean, okay, I was this Russell? Who were the people that approached?
No, Russell's the most well-known and well-quoted, frequently quoted advocate of the idea that Aristotle generalizes Greek grammar, and he wrote that in his History of Western Philosophy, and that got a lot of people read it, and so it kind of circulates. And people always quote the best writers, no matter how idiotic their views.
Okay, it's the first time I heard it, so maybe I've been spared.
It doesn't help that whole book is a stand-up routine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I got Clark, and then Garth.
Yeah. Let's see. I like your Venn diagram, and for reasons. As I think, because it gives me something to reference in terms of my thinking. I'm thinking, though, that it is a claim that's being made. And I would agree so far that what you're indicating, where there's intersection between logic, language, and reality, that is accurately, seems to be, from what I read from Aristotle, what he's also claiming. That he says that there is that space of intersection between the three. So that's a claim. And I'm having difficulty with the claim. And I think it's helpful to me that you just laid it out here so starkly, because I think that's where my skepticism lies. I don't know that the claim has been made to me that any of those three circles are actually as separate as they seem, or in some respect, in really any respect, and that's already been mentioned earlier, that they're independent from one another in any respect at all. And so that's also a claim on my part. And I think modernity is definitely, in that respect, I'm representing modernity in my skepticism. I cannot imagine language even existing without a logical apparatus that would actually define it as a language. I can't imagine logic existing without a language to express it. And I cannot imagine reality in any way being apprehended without either of those two things. And that is what is in question in modernity. So it's not like you haven't clarified things for me, but you've created a post,
Excellent.
from which I can walk from.
Right.
But I think there's a lot I have yet to be at all convinced that intersection even exists. I'm waiting for Aristotle to help me understand if it does. And so far, I think, it's the best I've heard yet, but I mean, from anyone, but it's coming up short for me so far, but I'm just beginning, so.
No, that's fantastic, Clark. And I appreciate and value skepticism. I really, really do. I don't want to be caught with my pants down and speaking bullshit. So but what I would like to correct is Aristotle doesn't argue for this, but rather this is how I'm representing the procedure he uses to attain the concept of change that he settles on. Right. And making explicit, right. So I think a lot of people will want to talk about this psychologically and talk about, like the inner workings of Aristotle's mind. And, he's really concerned about engineering and marine biology. And it seems like things are changing and he wants to do his marine biology. And so he needs, so you start coming up with motives, right? Motives that are unique to Aristotle. And I hear this kind of stuff philosophers often talked about this way. And so I just want to get us away. I want to give us an opportunity to think about what a philosopher is doing differently. And so you're right. It is my claim that the right way to understand what a Greek philosopher is doing is to use this Venn diagram and see the way in which logic, language, and reality meld in conceptual work, in thought, and in thought alone. So that's my claim. And I hope that it illuminates all the stuff that Aristotle is not telling us about why he does what he does. So I'm trying to illuminate the method and show its importance and show its skepsis resistance, and show that you need a logic that's not just a formal logic in order to allow this melding to be recognized. All right. So the alternative to a formal logic is a content logic, and a content is the content of being. And so one might say, the alternative to a formal logic is ontologic. It is ontology. And that's what the Greeks, my thesis, are doing. And this whole excursion into this text, and why I'm spending so much time on the concept of change, because it's really one of the only times that Aristotle gives us, the reasons why he has formulated a specific concept. He doesn't give us that with very many of his concepts. In fact, practically with none. So this is like a living laboratory where you can see a formation, a concept being born, and why it's born, and how it's born, and why it has the structure it does, and why it's resistant. Why does he settle with it? It's not its aesthetic beauty, and it's not its practicality. And so, yeah, but its ability to think things as changing in a way that doesn't fall prey to the Parmenidean critique. And so, yeah. And of course, he doesn't use the word concept. I'm introducing that word in order to give you a heuristic or something to hold on to in order to think through, this. How does he get to his definition, and what's the big deal about a definition? People in our culture often talk about my definition. Now, Aristotle doesn't say my definition. He says that basically this is how it has to be if you want to think change. And so your definition or my definition is completely irrelevant. The question is what is change's definition? And once you ask that question, you recognize that the definition, the concept, the linguistic expression, the logical expression, and the reality of the thing we're defining all come together as one. And that isn't a philosophical achievement. Garth and Sandy.
Oh, I don't, yeah, I guess my point is not really important anymore. So
I'm sorry. Come back to it if you want.
No, we should move on to Aristotle, I think.
Oh, well, we've been talking about Aristotle all the time. But yeah, via a detour. Sandy.
Oh, I just had a question about movement, which was in the reading today, and its relationship to change, because I have not been reading all of this, in any, I've just been reading it the way you gave us
right
the text, and it wasn't really clear to me how one relates to the other. I mean, I see that they're both related to being, because I see being coming up in both instances when he talks about them. Right. That doesn't mean I understand.
Excellent.
But I was just curious about this movement thing, because the change thing, I get it. We're going to be talking about it for a long time. It's really important. But I was wondering about movement. I was wondering about how those two relate at this point.
Just think of them as synonymous.
Oh, really?
Right. So a movement is just a change of place, just as.
Okay.
Right. It's just
so movement is a kind of change.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it's change of place, and not whereas going from brown to pale or red to pale to red is a change of quality, or getting bigger is a change of quantity. Change of place is movement.
So this is that why movement comes up in physics? Because this is more like the physical term, and change is more the metaphysical term, or is that a stupid question?
No, not at all. But the translator often says movement and change as if they were. But Aristotle just uses one word.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Geez, well, that's why I was confused. Okay.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. So what you need to do at this point is just think that movement is one kind of change. So changing place is one kind of change, changing color is another kind of change, changing size is another kind of change, changing relationships, like for instance, going from being a son to being a father. You've changed relationships. You haven't changed qualities, you've changed relationships. So these are all different kinds of change. Garth.
Okay, that helps me a little bit, but it also kind of angers me because I'm like, why didn't he just use the same word? But
Yeah, I know. It's just it's a problem of English. We just don't.
Isn't it in Latin though? Because I swear, isn't Latin they are using movement too, right? Like the medievals.
I'd have to check that. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know.
I just know that Thomas Aquinas uses it. I just heard people talking about it. That doesn't mean I know anything about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, like the word locomotion comes from change of place in Latin.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And
okay, interesting.
And motion here is obviously translating change. All right. Beautiful.
Yeah, I want to say like all motion is linear in a sense. Not that all motion is going in a straight line, but all motion is a process between like actuality, I guess. Like it's going from like a start to a finish, from a not to a yes, or I guess whatever is opposite of a not, you know.
Yeah.
From the contrary to the thing.
Right. And I think that's good that you bring that up, because eventually we're going to have to get clear about that, you know, that he's, you know, that ultimately there's motion or change that ceases when it attains its end. And there are motions or change that always have their end in themselves, have always already attained their end, right? And that's what he's going to call energy or energia, actuality. So we need to think change, and now we've got the concept, and then we're going to start thinking different kinds of change, and those are going to be important for distinguishing between, you know, the kind of change that became important for physics, you know, kinesis, motion, from the kind of change that's incredibly important in thinking about the metaphysical reality of things, or ethical qualities, being ethical, and the nature of the soul and the mind, right? That's going to be this other kind of change. So we need to get familiar. That's why I've been focused on change for so long, and trying to rebut as many objections to the standard objections to Aristotle as possible, so that this text can begin to speak to you a little bit more, and that you're not always trying to ward off these doubts in the back of your mind that come from some presuppositions that are ultimately untenable. And especially with respect to Clark, I do remind you, I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm not asking anybody to believe Aristotle. I'm just trying to get you to understand it so you can make it have an independent judgment. I want your judgment to be independent on assessing the strengths and weaknesses of his work. So by really grappling with the text, I'm not trying to get anybody to believe anything. All right. Okay. So I just have to ask. You know, honestly, last time we talked, I said we were gonna discuss Book 1, Chapter 9, but I did not assign it for this week because I had already assigned it. So can I get like somehow a show of hands or something of how many people have Book 1, Chapter 9 relatively present in there? I've read it recently. And if not, and if you just were not about, I mean, if nobody has it in their mind, then we'll just skip to what I actually assigned and move on.
What was the general theme?
Oh, it was, the general theme was distinguishing matter from lack, and why matter must be eternal. It can't be created.
Okay, yeah, I'm good on that, I think.
Okay. Okay, I only see one hand, so that's probably not a critical mass, but thank you, Garth, for remembering that. All right, so let's start reading Book 3. I wanted to read Book 3, at least the first 3 chapters of Book 3, because he starts talking about potentiality and actuality in a way that is easier to understand than how he does it in the metaphysics. So as beginning our return eventually to the metaphysics, I wanted to go through and see how potency and actuality, dunamis and ageia, how they operate in this text. All right. I don't have any specific passages I want to talk about right off the bat because I spent most of my time on book 1, chapter 9. So let's just read from the beginning and read a couple of paragraphs and then have people talk about it, ask questions, and let's see what Aristotle's doing. Let's do it. Can I get a reader?
I'll read.
Beautiful, Tyler. Thank you.
Since nature is a starting point of movement and change, and our methodical inquiry is concerned with nature, we must not neglect to consider what movement is, since if we are ignorant of this, we must be ignorant of nature too. And once we have made determinations about movement, we must try to inquire in the same way about the things that come next in order. Now,
yeah, go ahead. So I just want to remark, he seems to be starting over here. Just okay. So it's like we got this great definition of change, and now here in book 3, it seems like he's going to broach this topic again. Scholarship basically thinks that this is his second run at it, and it's a later text. So he chose to reformulate the concept of motion in terms of potency and actuality after he'd already attained that earlier conception. And one thing I guess we could do, but we probably won't do, is compare the conceptions and see if they're consistent with one another or whether there's a change of mind going on here. We don't need to do that much. Oh, go ahead, Ed.
Just briefly, did you already mention what this word nature is coming from in the Greek?
No, go ahead.
Just merely the fact that nature is translating physis, which is where we get the word physics, which is why this is called the physics. That's all.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure everybody has that present in their mind. I'll be right back. I'm going to get some water.
And also that physics is, or nature is something has a nature if it has a principle of movement and rest within it. And so it's not like physics in sort of our normal, college sense. For instance, all animals have a nature, rocks. Well, I guess they do too, because their nature is to rest. But crafted things do not have a nature because, or at least not one that comes from within, because the form is imposed by the artisan or the craftsman from outside, et cetera. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
Well, even rocks have a principle of motion because their principle is to move to their proper location in the cosmos.
Exactly.
So when with the crafted thing, would the craftsperson be the one with nature then? Instead of the object that they create?
yeah, the craftsman definitely has a nature.
Well, I didn't mean to ask a stupid question, but
No, I mean
as a person, but as a craftsperson, they also have a nature.
It's not a stupid question. The thing with the artifact is we only understand what it is with reference to the crafter, which means it cannot have its nature internal to itself.
Oh, right. That's like in an archaeological dig when they find some object and they don't know what it is and they can't figure out its function or who made it. It's like it just remains a mystery kind of thing because we can't really understand it without the knowing it's.
That's right. So,
and then they say aliens made it on the History Channel.
One of the interesting things here is we're getting at the foundational distinction, which is important to everybody, between the natural and the artificial, or nature and art. Right, that's being hammered out here in the early chapters of the physics. So studying nature is understanding how it's different from art, and that becomes an absolutely foundational distinction for comprehending absolutely anything in our tradition. So here's where it's being born. If that's interesting, Clark.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm here. So the term nature here, it would not be appropriate, if I'm understanding right, to bring up the concept of being and what its relationship might be to nature and how it's being used right here, because being brings in a metaphysical concept, and this is the book of physics, and I know more than what I just implied. I mean, I know that nature here is defined as the Greek word is physics, right?
Right.
So this is saying, since physics is a starting point of movement and change, if I were to say, well, what about being?
Right.
Then that question, what about being, is like, wait a second, that's another world. We got to stay in this world. Is that accurate?
No.
Okay.
Because we're inquiring into the being of change, and therefore the being of things insofar as they change, or the being of things qua changing, which is different than the being of things qua not changing. So it's definitely an ontological inquiry. We're looking into the nature, or the nature of nature, or the being of nature, or the being of changeable things. Does that help? Say that.
Well, I guess I'm confused then, because 2 weeks ago I remember hearing you say that there are two worlds going on here, and we have to make it clear that the terms that we're using are appropriate to the sphere, the domain that we're studying.
Exactly.
And I thought I understood it to be that when I engage into a question of what being is, then I'm entering into something that's not the domain of physics.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good point, and that's a very, very interesting point. And so what I'm going to say is the inquiry into being. So when I inquire into the being of change, I'm looking into what change is. But when I'm looking into being, I'm looking into what is. And is involved in change, but it's not identical with change. And so it's a different question. But that does not mean that change has no being. That would be the Parmenidean position.
Right. Yeah. Yep, that's helpful. Yeah, I just need that to be clarified even more. It's still, I understand the is, and that's the delineation there.
Right.
When you're talking about being qua being. But here, is it being qua nature?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that? Because I think it's a very, really important point to get clear on. Anybody want to reply to Clark or offer your own thoughts on that? Or maybe somebody has a better way of making the distinction than I did. I'm totally open. Okay. Okay, well, Charlie, I was thinking you would ask that question.
What is the difference between the nature of a thing and the essence of a thing?
Well, that's so.
I know that isn't anything we've talked about yet.
Right. But if we say the essence is that which a thing is with respect to its not changing, and right, and its nature, insofar as it has a nature, it will reflect the fact that this thing that doesn't change also undergoes changes. Right. So I mean, just with the silly idea, right? The human being is natural because there's lots of processes and motions going on in the organs and in the brain and all the rest of it, right? But all of that is maintaining the human being that I am, and that doesn't change through all the changes. So I stay human, and I only stay human through all of these changes. So I have an essence only because the extent to which I'm nature is so organized that it maintains me through the various changes. I stay alive. So here we have, essence as my unchanging nature, and my living processes as my as that aspect of me that changes all the time, but it changes in such a way that my unchanging essence it I don't know, remains or continues.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, so it looks like we're taking a new run at change, and so this might be new improved. This might be just a reformulation. We can ask that later. Let's see what he does. Tyler, do you mind reading another paragraph or two? Yeah.
Sure. Now, movement seems to be one of the things that are continuous, and the unlimited first comes to light in what is continuous. That is also why those who define the continuous often make use of the account of the unlimited as well, on the supposition that what is divisible without limit is continuous. In addition, it seems that without place, void, and time, it is impossible for there to be movement.
Okay.
Clearly then, okay, am I stopping?
No, go ahead.
Clearly then, both because of this and because these things are common to everything in nature and universal, we must first undertake to investigate each of them, since the theoretical knowledge of what is special is posterior to that of what is common. And first off, as we said, we should investigate movement.
Okay. Now, I don't really need to talk about this very much unless you have very specific questions, right? He's announcing some of the things that he will investigate later on in this book, right? What continuity is and its relationship to the unlimited, and then the essence of place, the essence of void, the essence of time. These are all things you must understand if you're going to have a science of physics. You're going to have a science of things insofar and only insofar as they change. Here we also, get at least a little support. Why isn't there a physics of numbers? Because they don't change. There's nothing about them that changes, and so they're not natural.
What are they then?
Formal, ideal. I mean, we really haven't explored that too much, but since they don't change, there can't be a physics of them, and to try to address them as things that change turns them into things that are no longer numbers, and begins to talk about mathematical entities as if they were physical entities. And so we got a kind of a category mistake there.
I have to interject with one of my favorite philosophical points from Plato, which is that if what it is to be changed changes, then change becomes incoherent.
You take it off, then change becomes what?
Incoherent. Because it's constantly but then we've got hands up.
No, go ahead and just explain that point, just your understanding of that point a little bit to help people with it, because it's important.
Oh yeah. If we say that what it is to be changed changes, then when we investigate change, we're investigating it with a changing criterion for change, and so we'll never know what change itself is.
Exactly. Because the criterion itself is always changing. It's always elusive, right? Clark.
Yeah, I like that. I've been puzzling when I first read it, and I still am puzzling on it, although it's the sentence, now movement seems to be one of the things that are continuous. Now movement seems to be one of the things that are continuous. And I'm really puzzled. Why wouldn't it say now nature seems to be one of the things that are continuous? If he's saying now movement seems to be one of the things that are continuous, well, that's the wrong word, isn't it? Because for it to be moving, it means that it has some ability to not move or something. How do you know movement if it's not moving? And so it's not continuous. So it's not continuous is my point. So it seems to be the wrong word there. And he seems to be wanting to connect it. And he goes, well, if it's continuous, then it's unlimited. And that all makes sense. I mean, continuous and unlimited, but I don't get the move from movement to continuous, because those are not compatible somehow.
Does anybody have a approach to Clark's?
Yeah. I could at least suggest that perhaps if we gloss continuous as something like what somebody talks about now when they say something is analog as opposed to digital, then that can help us.
I'm not very good at this. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So nature and movement take place in a way that's analog. It doesn't have discrete quanta. It happens along a continuum. And so that's what's meant by continuous here. And that also suggests that it's infinitely divisible instead of having, say, pixelated space or pixelated time. Change takes place in an analog way and not a digital way. Might be one way of parsing it.
When you say continuous, that would link up, I think, to the concept of substance in some sense, right?
Tyler, you're kind of fading in and out. Can you get closer to your microphone? I didn't understand you.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just saying, I think the continuous here would relate to substance, right? Because substance would undergo changes in a continuous it would stay itself through changes. So the continuity seems to relate somehow to me.
Well,
or I'm just misunderstanding.
You might be right, but I mean, I think, what resonates with Ed's answer to me is we should probably really just be thinking about Zeno right now, right? In order to get, to the finish line, I got to get halfway there. But in order to get halfway there, I got to get a quarter of the way there, right? And that's infinitely divisible, so I can ultimately never get anywhere, because any interval, no matter how small, has an infinite number of intervals. Right? And
okay, no, yeah, that helps.
Okay,
I understand now.
Thanks. Okay, cool. Thanks. That's great. Nick? And then I'd like to hear from Clark also after Nick to find out if that is a meaningful response to what you were asking about. But Nick's been very patient, so I want to get him too. And
no, you can go to Clark first. That's fine.
Clark?
Oh, yeah. I'm puzzling on that. I'm chewing on the analog aspect of movement. I don't think it's directly connecting to my puzzlement about using that word there and connecting it continuous. It seems like an unnecessary, something's unnecessary there, and it's just confusing. But anyway, I appreciate the efforts.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, I just want to understand Clark's confusion. Like, you're having trouble with what Ed commented in terms of his analogy with
his original question, was why is he talking about movement as continuous rather than nature? It seems like it should be nature that he's talking about, and so he's troubled by it seems like a bait and switch or something.
Okay,
Clark, is that fair?
That's part of it. It just seems like it would be a better word for the point he's making. But then I have a specific dispute with the whole concept of what movement is in relation to what is continuous. So, and it might be just a definitional tautological issue, but if that's the case, he seems to think there's something distinctive between them.
Right.
And I'm just wondering how movement's even going to be identified if it's not part of some sort of not movement.
I think that's really interesting. And the more I read the physics, the more I recognize how deeply anti-Parmenidean it is. And so he says here, now movement seems to be one of the things that are continuous, right? So he's echoing an opinion out there, right? And it's indeed the first opinion, so it must be a very widespread and authoritative one for him to tackle it first. So movement and change, going from yellow to red, there's always a shade of color in between those two that the change would have to attain, and it would have to get to the midway shade before it gets to that other midway shade. And so every change seems to have get in locked into this problem of continuity, right? Of the continuum. It all seems to take place in the continuum, and if it's a continuum, then it's infinite, and then it can, in no amount of time can it ever get from one state to the next.
This was kind of why I brought in substance, but I think the issue is, how does something that we treat as discrete jump to something we also treat as discrete?
Right. So he's preparing the ground for introducing the concepts of potency and actuality in order to deal with this. So I think that Clark's question is really, really important to get why he might be addressing this. Let me see, Nick, then Garth.
Yeah, I actually find it curious that movement and change are equated. I mean, that for him sounds like all changes are movement and vice versa. And the idea of continuous movement also, well, that passage I thought is to some extent I found it very I don't know profound that the idea of continuity and divisibility, unlimited divisibility, as something well, that's well put. But then, are all movements really continuous, or is that just one type of movement? Because you mentioned the color, but from black to white, one can, maybe that's not a good example, because as you pointed out, there might be a transition in between. But let's say like in quantity from 0 to 1, discrete, like a family growing from 3 to 4. It doesn't go continuously from 3.2 to 3. I mean, these are discrete things.
Well, the numbers are discrete, right? The numbers are discrete. The numbers are discrete. I mean, that's kind of interesting that in order to deal with the problem of continuity, you've left continuity altogether and have gone to the discrete. And I think that's interesting. The numbers are discrete, but
but I say that because when he talks about change, it has to be something. It's a quantity, a quality, or likewise. So quantity is also part of change, as well as quality and so forth. So it is within that scope. It's fair game.
No,
quantity can be continuous or discrete. So
but
I think it's a little bit vague and a little bit I think overreaching to say that all movement is change, and change is all movement.
Well, I would agree with it. I tried to say before that motion is a kind of change, but it's not all change. But all change, and so if we think of change as the genus, and then we got different kinds, right, and movements down here. Now, if movement might have something to do with the continuum, right, and changing qualities might have something to do with the continuum, but maybe these species have something to do with the continuum because the problem of change itself at the genus level has the problem of the continuum. And so you would be correct to say not all change is movement and all movement is change. But if all change or all becoming means going from one discrete point to another discrete point with an infinite number of possible points in between them, then all change seems impossible. And that's, of course, Zeno and Parmenides' point. And so if we're going to talk about change, here we go again, we need to be able to show that change is not just an illusion. And Mike's got a good question. Can numbers change? And that's the point, that Nick got totally right. 1 doesn't change into 2. They're always discrete and different. But if something moves from weighing 1 pound to weighing 2 pounds, there's an infinite number of there's an infinite number of weights that have to get through to get through. So even though the 1 and the 2 don't change, anything changing from 1 to 2 would have to go through an infinite number of I don't know, intervals. Garth and then Richard, and then anybody that I've like Nick and Clark, if I give you short shrift and you want to repeat your question in a different way, please feel free. I don't want to dispatch anybody. But in the meantime, yeah.
I don't know whether Aristotle formulates this anywhere, but I think you can have something that is discrete as well as continuous. You have a finite number, and they're also continuous.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm
not
trying
sure
to remember my topology classes in when I was studying math, but I do think that they're not really contraries. Like divisible and indivisible are contraries, but I don't think that indivisible and continuous is the contrary pair.
Interesting.
I think indivisible opposes divisible, but there's some distinction between that and continuous for Aristotle, I think.
Cool. Let's look for that in the text as he proceeds. Richard, and then Sandy.
So I was looking at like potency and potentiality. So in Greek, they're the same word.
Right.
And then, but I guess both words are used in translating to English, I guess, because in Greek it has like related but slightly different connotations. Can you potentially like clarify between? So I'm looking at something and it says like potentiality is, contrasted to like actuality, and then potency is contrasted to action.
Yeah, but yeah, let's just think. I beg you, at this point, to just think it was completely synonymous.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are artifacts of the English language, as if there were something really significant about that difference, but they're not for Aristotle. So you can use either pair, but the content I want you to give those terms needs to come from the Aristotelian text as he gets there.
Okay.
Okay, cool, thanks. No, that's good because it's potentially very, very confusing, these translational issues. So I'm glad you put your finger on it. Sandy.
Well, now that I found out that movement and change are kind of the same thing, I'm wondering if, and this can be an open question for next time because I know I'm wondering if potential and actual are the same thing as matter and lack, or is that totally, is there a relation there? Or is he talking about something totally different?
I think there's a relation, but they're not equivalents.
Exactly. I'd say that too.
Okay, but is the relation significant to the point that we would actually want to look at those two things together, or is it not?
Well, he does use potential, I think, with respect to the underlying subject in the original definition of change. And although I'm not quite sure if he talks about actuality there. So, so they're definitely related, but I'm not gonna try to give a concrete answer to that until we get a little bit further in, because I'm a little bit shaky as to how he was using potency in chapter 1. So I think it's worth going back to that. He says that the bronze is not accidentally the potential to become a statue, but the lack is accidentally potential to become the statue. So he makes that strange distinction, and it's one of those things we have to get a little bit more familiar with. This coincidental versus non-coincidental, which is the same as accidental and non-accidental. We need to get used to that language a little bit more. But I'm just affirming that you're right to see a connection.
Okay, good. That's actually reassuring.
Okay. If I can reassure anybody, I'm very, very happy. All right, so he's announcing some topics that he's going to get to in the course of this book. He's not going to discuss any of these things in great detail. He's working towards what he's really interested in at the very beginning here, and that's potency and actuality. Hey, Peter, those aren't the Kozman translations, are they? I think it's, yeah,
No,
activity.
this is Hackett and Reeve, right?
Right. Okay, yeah, but Kozman says you need to think of energai as activity, and I don't remember what he says about dunamis.
Yeah, just I'll get it in just a second.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's get to it. So we see that we have to deal with the problem of the continuum. We didn't have to deal with that in our last definition. We just had to deal with the non-being of movement and change. And now we have a new obstacle that seems to make movement and change impossible, right? The continuum, the infinite divisibility. So now we need a different, a nuanced concept to deal with this new obstacle that the Parmenidean brilliance has put in the way of the possibility of physics, the possibility of thinking change, thinking becoming. Can somebody, Tyler, you're just going to give me a reader today if you're cool with that. Just go ahead and keep reading from where you left off.
All right, so we're at some things.
Right.
All right. Some things then are actual only, others potential and actual, being either a this something, a quantity, a quality, or likewise one of the other categories of being.
Mm-hmm.
Of what is relative, one sort is said of things with reference to excess and deficiency, another with reference to affecting and being affected, and in general with reference to what can move something and be moved by something. For what can move something can move what can be moved by it, and what can be moved by something can be moved by what can move it.
All right. Start at the beginning. And what do you understand? What do you think he's doing here at the beginning? I mean, he's making a list, obviously. But do you recognize where, like, quantity, quality, substance, where these things are coming from?
I think one of the interesting things that's going on is that some things, it seems that for something to have any potential, there must first be something actual that has the capacity to become something else. So we start in a sense with at least two things in an important relation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have, there are things that are potential only. That's probably what I least understand about this section.
Okay, yeah.
I think the potential only means that, yeah, I guess I don't understand where the potential only, what role that plays here. That's my one confusion.
Oh yeah, that's good, but maybe we can just connect that with what Sandy said and think about that lack.
Is this like his first potentiality, second potentiality? I mean, it's like you have a potential, but you haven't actualized it.
Oh, that's good, Peter. Can you briefly break that down? Just explain what first and second potentiality is.
So, I mean, any human, let's say any normal human, has the potential to be a musician.
Mm-hmm.
Only some people have actualized that by actually studying music and studying an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And even of those people, unless you're actually playing the instrument or being musical, you're not fully actualizing your thing. So there's sort of two levels of potentiality there: the potential to have become that, and then once you have that potential to actually actualize it.
Exactly. So you're able to play music in a different sense when you're a musician and just happen not to be playing right now, than in a sense in which a newborn human being is also potentially a musician, but in a different sense, right? They haven't actually acquired the ability, but they can acquire the ability. So we got two different. So that's a very good example with the music to distinguish these two levels of potentiality. It's very, very important for Aristotle to distinguish them. So that's why it's worth rehearsing that thought right now.
Just to be snarky, once you've actualized your potential for music, now you've actualized also your potential to, or maybe now you have the potential to become unmusical because the person who was never musical could, in some
Oh
sense,
yeah, beautiful.
can become unmusical.
Yes. So yeah, I got Ed. You want to follow up on Peter's point, or?
Well, just a quick note that he does seem to be using categories in a different way here, or using a different bundle of them, because he goes on to say immediately after this that only these this bundle of, I think, 4 or 5 are involved in change or motion. But it would seem, if we go to the original categories, that, you know, having is a, you know, you can have shoes on or not have your shoes on, or you can change from one to the other. So he seems to be rebundling these categories in a different way than he did in the categories.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for the remark. Richard, I'm going to let you, you've had your hand up, so go ahead and get in here, please.
What Peter just said there about the musician, like the first and second potentialities, that reminds me, I think, like of like 1 or 2 sessions ago about the, did you know, whoops, sorry. My phone was on a web page and then suddenly it starts playing an ad onto the audio. Weird. Okay. Okay, sorry, my broke my train of thought. Okay, like the first and second potentialities, but reminds me of like the reading 1 or 2 sessions ago about the doctor who was like building a house or something, or building.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it's like, I think like that also kind of applies, like that like I like the order's kind of jumping around, like he's like we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about change all these past few sessions, right? So okay, so
no, I think that's excellent, and I actually want to go back and think about that relation. I didn't catch it, and I think you're absolutely right that's important. So thank you for bringing it up, Sandy.
Unfortunately, I'm waking up at the crack of dawn every day, so I'm not going to be able to really think beyond 6 o'clock today with this group.
That's fine.
But I did want to say, or just ask everybody, because for me, I mean, I love doing every 2 weeks. Like, I get it, you know, I as you know, I changed my group to every week for other reasons, but I kind of feel like I need sometimes to touch base in between that time period. And I do have a Zoom account, so I guess I could offer that if anybody's interested, because I find with this material that having the 2-week break, I get really lazy and I check out. And like, because at the end of these sessions, I'm always like, oh yeah, I'm starting to get it, right? And then unfortunately, it's not really sticking as well as I would hope. So if anybody else is interested.
I love that idea. I love that idea. And I would like to maybe just offer this, that as long as this window works for people on Thursdays, that every week, at least I and a couple other people are here, and there's no like formal lesson, but there's an opportunity to like talk about what we talked about last time and just process it a little bit. So that way I wouldn't have to prepare anything and start freaking out and
yeah, no, that's what I mean. Just to recap and be like, okay, so Aristotle, change. Cool. And then I'm not coming with like a deer in the headlights when I show up every time.
No, I love that idea. And as a matter of fact, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. Every Thursday, I'm going to open up the Zoom. Wait, and I just have to figure out how you're all going to get the Zoom link. I mean, it's always the same.
I have a Zoom. I can make a special designated Aristotle study group Zoom.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then we have to figure out a way. I mean, we'd have to post it on Meetup, right? Which is
that's okay.
Okay.
That's okay. Cool. I don't really use it for anything else besides my group.
Yeah, I have Meetup organizer rights too with philosophers, so I could publish that if Sandy doesn't want to.
Okay.
I don't know if you really want to distribute the responsibility for all this amongst different people to coordinate. I can make an ID in one very easily, Michael, and can just keep using it.
Yeah, I like that's a good point. I like the consistency, and I like the fact that people can come or not come every other week, but there's a little higher bar for these text discussions, but then it's like if people have time and they want to rap a little bit about Aristotle and some of the stuff we've been talking about, then we can do that in the off weeks. So
do you guys want to make it like a little bit, this is just a suggestion, like to make it kind of more easy to go into this every other week kind of like study discussion group by making it a little shorter, like
Yeah.
like making the off week kind of a shorter thing, but like just to kind of help reinforce and keep the momentum going, like 60 or 10 minutes.
I think that's great. Yeah. I think that the off week should just be completely informal and people should come go as they please. And I just, I don't mind being, I can do my own, I don't mind being on Zoom for 2 hours and then people come and go as they please. But we can assign it as 1 hour. And then if people want to talk about stuff more, then we just talk about stuff more.
Peter, do you plan on being there? Because actually it might make sense for Peter, do you plan on being there?
Well, yeah, there are plans, but
Yeah.
plans. Sure, I can try and make the effort. I will make the effort. So I can just at the same link and same time and all that stuff.
I mean, Peter, I can take that off your hands so you don't feel, the obligation. I mean, I can.
The question.
Can I be a host? Can somebody make me a host?
No.
Actually, next week will not be a good week to do this, would it? Next week. The beach house, being at the beach, or are we going to do that?
Well, that'll be. It's Thursday. Everybody's going to be back from the beach by then, or at least the beach house. Yeah, it's.
All right.
Got to clear out by 10 a.m. So if we do this at 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 or whatever, that there won't be any conflict.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll also figure out coordinating more online about it and stuff.
Cool. Garth, you got your hand up for a while.
Oh yeah, I linked it in the chat here. I found a paper online about continuity for Aristotle.
Oy, okay.
And he uses an example in Metaphysics Book 5 of 2 pieces of wood.
Yeah.
And so if you have 2 pieces of wood, you can put them next to each other so they're contiguous, but that doesn't make them continuous.
Right.
So continuity seems like a very deep property of something.
Interesting.
Like a line is continuous because even if you chop it up, it's still one line. You're dividing it, but you're really just dividing it symbolically,
right?
As opposed to a piece of wood that you break into multiple pieces, you can't put them back together,
right?
You're distinguishing its parts rather than breaking it into pieces.
So in that way, like water is continuous, right? Like if you put 2 pieces of water next to each other, they will become one. Right. And some notes I wrote down here earlier is something that is continuous is more than just divisible in that sense. Like, so when you divide it up, it has the property that it remains the same thing. It still functions. So like, I could take my computer and I could divide it up, but then it wouldn't be a computer anymore. It would just be a bunch of parts, right? So that's different than, like a substance like water or something. You divide it up and it stays water. But I think he argues that these things too have a minimum element beyond which they can't be divided.
Yeah.
So he has a lot to say about continuity, I think.
Yeah, there's yeah, you're right. Just if you think I divide my computer in 2 and now it's not my computer anymore because it doesn't function, and I can continue dividing, but I'm not dividing a computer anymore, right? I'm dividing some plastic or some metal, right? And that doesn't have any limit to how to divide it until you get to its atoms. And then when I get to or some molecule that's the basic molecule for something metal or plastic. And then when I start dividing that, I'm not dividing plastic or metal anymore. I'm dividing molecular bonds, or I'm dividing atoms, right? So that the nature of the thing changes as you continue to divide. And so that means that, there's forms all the way down. But it's not the computer form, right? It's then the plastic form, and then it's the atomic form, and then it's whatever comes after that. Yeah. Okay. So I think that's a great idea, that we do this. So what's the next step in terms of, so I'm committed to be here Thursdays between 4 and 6 or whatever. But I guess the next step is that everybody has to have the link. And should I just
Do the
post
same one as this link? So anybody here who's here right now can just remember this link, and we can try and figure out how to post it up on Meetup, maybe as a comment to the current.
Mhm.
Is
And I
it,
can-
is it possible to save like this link to my Zoom account or something? Or
Just
or is
cut
this
and
just
paste it.
the-
Just-
to a-
just cut and paste it? Okay.
or
Yeah, it's
make
the
it as a
same
bookmark
link
in your
every week.
browser.
Yeah.
It's the same link, right, Michael?
Yes.
You're using the same link every 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you can just copy it. I've been using it since the early
Okay.
days. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And if you don't know, if you lose it, you can always go back to one of the old meetups, like from last
Right.
week or 2 weeks ago, and the
They
link will be
that won't work, Michael, because they
Oh.
don't show it. They only show it the day of your meetup.
Oh, okay, my bad.
But you can copy it right now and you'll have it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's nice to
okay.
have that continuity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mike put it in the chat. For anyone who wants to copy it right now, it's in the chat.
Yeah. I don't want anybody to get screwed on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the meetup to a weekly. So it'll get posted as weekly, and then
Oh, I
on
see.
the day of, I can just post the link like I always do, and just do it weekly instead of bi-weekly. And that way there's always a backup system.
Okay. I might not always
No, of course
RSVP on that. Sometimes I might drop
No.
in or just depending, because I mean when there's so but you're just going to explain like on the post then, like this is like the study session, you don't have to have read, right?
No, it's always the same people who come. It doesn't matter who RSVPs. They stop. I mean, they don't come or they don't show up. I'm not so worried about that. If people come on an off day, we can announce. This is the bi-weekly
Oh, okay.
informal rap session, and then if you really want to do more intense stuff or more text related, then you come to the formal session. And I realize text related is a little bit of a scare quotes because I don't always get to the text. But maybe with an informal rap session, I'll be able to clarify a lot of the background stuff and then save the text sessions for the text. I know that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Or like maybe people who want to post all these secondary articles and stuff, like that would be a good time to share all that stuff.
Right. Right.
And then when we do the actual reading, because doing the reading is a lot, it's a lot of work, and sometimes we don't get to talk about the whole thing, and then it's like,
yeah.
I mean, which I obviously we're not going to be able to talk about the whole thing, but it just might help me orient me. I mean, I'm glad. I don't want you to organize a group around me, obviously, but I was just putting it out there to see what other people felt.
Well, you're not just you, so take solace in that. Ed.
What's interesting is that when Sandy first brought up this, this is just what came in my head when she first said she loses connection to, Sandy, when you said that you lose connection to what's going on, like the first thing that popped into my head was actually on the off weeks, just simply reading the text out loud with no commentary and no stopping would be a way to reconnect with it and stay in touch with it. But that sounds like it's not the direction people are thinking. But
it's an option we can explore, right?
Because that probably would take maybe less than an hour to just run
know,
through
but
it.
it's like the discipline for a distracted person like me. I don't know.
Because then what happens is if you just read it out loud together with people, then it just happens automatically as long as you sit together. The reading just quickly happens.
Oh, okay, yeah. I need the other people. It's like a support group. I feel like
so. I mean, that's another possibility. And then if people wanted to chat afterward, I mean, it's an option if it's a way of keeping connected and not worrying about the responsibility of reading outside. Then, given that these readings are relatively short, it might be a nice way just to keep it in the back of one's mind would be to start it out with just quickly reading through it without any comment.